Okay, ready? What's up, Barnhill family, and welcome back to your home for all things combat sports.
Yo.
So, Nick, immediate recap, UFC 296, Leon Edwards, looking about as polished as a champion can look, beat Colby Covington in all aspects of the fight.
Yeah.
But what was really most impressive to me, because we all kind of thought that he was going to, be able to outstrike Colby, and especially if he could keep Colby at the end of that jab and those kicks, that he could really have some success. But I'm really impressed by his wrestling and his grappling defense and his ability to also get up when taken down. I mean, this was a masterful performance for Leon.
Yeah, the judges had it 49-46. I had it a clean sweep for Leon Edwards. 5 rounds up, 5 rounds down for the champion, and still Leon Edwards. And it's crazy to me to see a guy like Leon Edwards, who's seen just as a striker. And obviously in MMA in 2023, everybody's good everywhere. But for him to go out there and out-grapple Colby and be more than willing to engage not only in defensive wrestling, but also offensive wrestling. He got Colby off his legs, and you'd think a guy like Leon Edwards, who has the title of striker and everybody thinks he should just avoid the ground at all costs, he turns right around and shoots his own takedown. Oh, by the way, he's successful with it. Oh, by the way, he gets him down and basically damn near passes the legs of Colby Covington.
Yeah.
I mean, what we saw was one of the most impressive performances we've ever seen out of a champion when it goes to defending your title. And look, Colby Covington is the monster in people's closet that everybody at 170 has been avoiding and having to deal with for years now. And the fact that Leon Edwards went out there and batted a perfect game against a guy like that speaks to the level that he's progressing at. Leon Edwards is quickly rising, and in my opinion, 170 is humming on all cylinders right now, but there's one clear-cut guy that's just way ahead of the pack. And after tonight, I think it's Leon Edwards, especially because we did get to see who, in my opinion, is the next guy, the next star at 170, and Shavkat Rakhmonov, go up against a guy who's also been a thorn in the side for many people at welterweight, which is Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And he looked really good against him. Don't get me wrong. A finish over Wonderboy Thompson's very hard, especially getting it over submission. But Shavkat Rakhmonov looked like he had his hands full, and that's a fight I'd love to see happen. Leon Edwards, Shavkat Rakhmonov, and as it sits tonight, while I'm huge on Shavkat and I think he will be a champion at some point, that fight now after tonight's performance by Leon Edwards seems a whole lot closer to me.
Yeah, it does to me too. And Leon Edwards, we knew he was going to get in there and really look good as far as his striking. He's got some of the most precise ones and twos in the game. He's got some of the most lethal kicks. We saw him chew Colby's leg up. One thing I was surprised to see was Colby switching stances as often as he was.
Me too.
And I think that was because he didn't really want to completely lose the mobility of that front leg. And so we knew we were going to kind of see that. But then when we saw Leon really absolutely not only defend certain takedowns, get up when he was taken down, but also get those reversals, as you said, and he was able to actually have some grappling success of his own.
Right.
And then when you juxtapose that with Shavkat Rakhmonov, he did his thing. He submitted Wonderboy Thompson. That's not an easy thing to do. Make no mistake about it, Wonderboy's a well-rounded MMA guy, even if he has a karate base, and he had never been submitted in his career, his very long pro MMA career, until tonight, and Shavkat Rakhmonov submitted him. But Leon Edwards is going to be way harder to get down than Stephen Thompson was. Yeah. And so I want to break down the Shavkat fight with Wonderboy, but I just want to stress how impressive of a fight this was for Leon Edwards. I mean, Colby Covington really had nothing for him. He was reaching for shots. He seemed very out of place on the feet.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And look, everybody talked about Colby Covington's gas tank going into this fight, and rightfully so. He's got one of the best gas tanks in the entire UFC, and it seems like he can just go for days. And that's really scary when he's able to fight his fight and dictate the pace and dictate where the fight takes place. But he was not able to do that. And when you watch Leon Edwards stay at kickboxing range, keep Colby just out of distance, and not only did he keep Colby out of distance for wrestling, he kept him out of distance for even threatening takedowns, attempts, level changes, any of that stuff. Colby Covington literally had to go in there and kickbox with Leon Edwards for the better half of the first half of the fight. And for me, that was a big tell. And that told me, okay, we're now 3 rounds into this fight. Colby hasn't won a single minute of it yet. He's not really known for getting finishes off of knockouts, and he's not really known for submitting people very quickly. He's more of a get you up against the cage, get you on the ground, cook you, boil you, defeat you, and defeat you mentally before he starts to defeat you physically. you realize that takes time. That takes 25 minutes. That's why Colby Covington is perfect. His fight style is perfect for a 25-minute fight. But when he's not able to get anything going in the first 15 minutes, you realize that game plan is not good in a 10-minute time frame. And Leon Edwards, basically, I knew he was safe as soon as the third round ended because Colby Covington now doesn't have the time he needs to cook his opponent. Even if Leon Edwards decides to kick his feet up and not do anything for the next 2 rounds, he's still not going to get knocked out by Colby, and he wasn't going to get submitted. Of course, the champ didn't do that. He came in. He's still willing to engage all the way until the very last minute, and not only just engage on the feet, engaged on the ground. Looked really good doing it, but the level of striking difference was what really sold this fight for me. Leon Edwards is a master striker. He can be flashy if he needs to, but he'll beat you with the fundamentals. Long, straight punches. Anytime you try to come into his territory whatsoever, you're going to have a vicious check hook coming your way. You're going to have long 1s and 2s coming down the pipe, and he knows how to time his leg kicks perfectly to where he can really eat your legs up. And if your wheels aren't working, if your wheels aren't in top condition, you're not going to get there very fast.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of ways, Leon made this fight closer than it even had to be with his willingness to grapple, how he went for some of the takedowns as well. He looked for a guillotine at one point in the fight. If Leon had just gotten up from every one of those takedowns, and it was only a handful of them, and separated and gone right back to kickboxing range, it easily would have been a 50-45 or a 50-44. Colby really had nothing for him on the feet. And as you said, after the first 15 minutes is up and down, and Leon won the entirety of that 15 minutes. Now it's like, okay, Colby Covington has 10 minutes, 2 rounds to knock Leon Edwards out. Right. And that's just a tough proposition, or submit him. But that's a tough proposition when you're a guy who's used to winning, as you said, grinded out decisions where he cooks his opponent. Leon Edwards was the opposite of cooked in that fight. Leon Edwards looked like he could have gone another 5 rounds. You know, you normally see when Joe Rogan is interviewing a fighter after the fight, even the guy that won is a little, huffing and puffing and having a hard time breathing. Leon Edwards was talking like he had just started the warm-up. I mean, the guy could have gone multiple more rounds. And, what can I say? Credit to him. He's definitely in the top 3 or 4 pound for pound right now in the UFC. Shavkat Rakhmonov, if he's next, is going to have his hands full. Bilal Muhammad, I don't think that would really be all that competitive. I don't think Bilal has enough on the feet to really contend much with Leon. He certainly is deserving. His body of work would deserve that shot. But I think you're looking at a guy who may be holding that belt for some time.
I agree with you. And a lot of the guys that are at the top of 170 are similar fighting styles, right? Look at Kamaru Usman and Colby. They have a very similar style. I would lump Bilal into that same style. And Leon Edwards, his team, that gang of fighters and trainers in whatever camp he's got, seems to have the answers for everything those guys bring to the table. Yeah, they're going to throw some decent strikes at you, but they're really not looking to stand and strike with somebody like Leon Edwards. So let's get this fight to the ground. But Bilal Muhammad is not going to be able to do something differently that Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington weren't able to do. I don't see his skill set being different enough for them to defeat Leon Edwards. I don't see him being able to do much more than what Colby Covington did against Leon Edwards, unless he's willing to just bite down on the mouthpiece and swing. But that's not something you want to do against Leon Edwards either, because he's such a lethal striker. And I will say, on top of all of that stuff, Leon's always been in great shape. He's always come in lean, and I think he's built perfectly for 170. But he's a big body, and it looked like he filled his frame out even better now than he ever has before. I think he's just now getting into his prime. I think he's just now finding his groove as a world champion. He knows for sure now, any doubters that might have thought he wasn't the best 170 in the world have their answer. He's absolutely the best 170 fighter in the world, and I think he's willing to take any comers, give him any of those undefeated welterweights that want to get the smoke. I think they're going to get it, and I think they're going to get finished if they go in there with him.
Yeah, an incredibly impressive performance. I want to move now to the co-main event. My fight of the night on the main card. I know Irene Aldana had, a fight for the ages for the women, definitely women's fight of the year. But Pantoja versus Royval was a lot of fun. Now, this was also 49-46. Yeah. But this was a very different 49-46 than was Colby Covington. And, Pantoja looked really good, but Royval showed a true dog. He certainly was somebody that I enjoyed watching before, but I really became a massive fan of Brandon Royval tonight. He didn't quit from start to finish. He knew he was behind. He was game. He bit down on his mouthpiece. Some great grappling exchanges in that fight. That was one of those fights that took place on the ground. The majority of the fight took place on the ground, but it wasn't boring because there was so many good positional changes, so many good reversals, great submission attempts. When it did go to the feet, both guys were cracking. Pantoja was landing an excellent body kick the whole fight. Royval was landing some good straight punches. It was a really fun fight. I think Brandon Royval will fight for a title again at some point. He's just not quite to that level of being the elite of the elite yet.
I agree with you on that. And while the flyweights are certainly not a division that is star-studded or full of big names, there's a reason the diehard MMA fans, the people that don't miss a fight card, love the flyweight division, and it was on full display tonight. Pantoja looked great. He's real aggressive with his striking. He's tenacious, and he has a game plan where he's going to get you to the ground. He's going to cook you down there. He's going to, he loves half guard. He loves to control half of your body on the bottom side and then cover that shoulder. That can open up some strikes for him. And then he was able to advance a little bit into some more what would be considered advantageous positions, like mount, like taking the back, like even side control. But Brandon Royval was such a wiry and just elusive,
slippery,
guy.
crafty,
he's slippery,
fella, yeah.
Man. He's hard to hold down, and he's not willing to concede for a second any sort of bad position. And that's why Pantoja had his hands full. That's why Pantoja started to gas. And then Brandon Royval really started to come on strong in round 3. That's the round I had for Royval. A lot can be said for Royval. He came in there game, ready to go, and he fought at the level of a champion. He just was in there with a guy who was a little bit better everywhere as far as mixed martial arts goes. The 5th round would have been great for Brandon Royval if he would have been able to really put those strikes together for an extended 2.5 or 3 minutes. But after that first couple of minutes where he's just tagging Pantoja, somebody in Pantoja's corner was just yelling, "Get this fight to the ground." And he heard that command, got the fight to the ground, and was able to do what he had to do to get to the end of the fight without taking too much damage from Brandon Royval. So much can be said for both of them, but the right guy got his hand raised, and I really do think Pantoja is going to find himself in a new groove after getting his hand raised. And to be completely honest, the flyweights need it. They need a champion like this, and they needed some sort of parity because for the longest time, it just felt like Figgy and Brandon Moreno were the only guys at flyweight.
Yeah.
And everybody else just doesn't matter. They're just sitting
fighting for the 17th time. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So we don't need to see that anymore. Pantoja looked great, but Brandon Royval's stock went through the roof tonight. I'd love to see him in some more 5-round fights because I think he's a 5-round fighter and will find himself in a title fight again very soon.
Yeah, fight night main events for Brandon Royval now.
That's a money spot for him.
Absolutely. I mean, he looked really, really good in there. And Pantoja's pressure grappling was excellent. The chest to chest, the ability to pass the guard, the back takes, how he was able to surf the hips and get those beautiful knee cut passes and things like that. I was very, very impressed with Pantoja's performance. And Moreno weighed in as the backup fighter. Maybe they get him back in there and let him take a crack at the belt again. I think the Assassin Baby has done enough to probably earn himself another title shot unless somebody can really do something exciting at 125 to make themselves undeniable. And now, kind of moving into the feature bout 170, Shavkat versus Wonderboy. I think there's a lot of good things that we can say about Wonderboy. He proved that he's harder to take down than most people think. Shavkat Rakhmonov is lights out with his takedowns. He's got trips, he's got singles, he's got doubles, he's got body lock takedowns. He uses the cage very well. He even had his hands clasped at one point. Wonderboy broke the grip in that first round. Shavkat could not get him down. And Stephen Thompson, I think, landed some of the better shots in that round. So credit to Wonderboy. He's a legend, 40 years old. I think we were all kind of hoping that maybe he could have like one last title shot or one last title run. But truthfully, now we know it'd be against Leon. And we, I think, all kind of know that wouldn't go his way, being that he's over 40 years old. But not out with the old and in with the new, because I think Wonderboy can still do some fun things in the sport. But Shavkat Rakhmonov made himself the number one contender tonight with that submission victory over Wonderboy. So how do you see, how would you rate Shavkat's victory? And then do you think it was enough to give him the jump over Bilal Muhammad to being the next person to fight Leon Edwards?
I do believe it did enough for him to get over Bilal. And before I really start to break down Shavkat and everything he did right, I do have to say styles make matchups. Wonderboy Thompson versus Leon would be a very interesting fight because of how the fight would just take place. You're going to see a lot of striking, and Leon Edwards is the best striker at the welterweight division right now. But Wonderboy Thompson is right there in that secondary spot. And the proof is in the pudding. Shavkat Rakhmonov, who has 8 knockouts and now 9 or 10 submissions, is a very lethal striker. He's very good everywhere. You saw him on display against Jeff Neal, throwing in great exchanges with Jeff Neal. So he's not afraid to stand and strike with people. He did not want to strike with Stephen Wonderboy Thompson tonight. He made that very clear. Obviously, he loves his grappling. He's very good with his submission. So why go out there and make your job any harder for yourself than it has to be? If there's a guy like Wonderboy who's literally has a legendary kickboxing career, a legendary karate career, just has the most ridiculous pedigree when it comes to striking, yeah, maybe it's not a good idea to go out there and strike with him. Take him to the ground, take him into deep waters. And while that's easier said than done, he was able to get that done. That was a tough objective for him to do. But then once he got that wrist control, Dagestani handcuff type of thing up against the cage and basically had Wonderboy defenseless sitting on his butt, I knew it was only a matter of time. He was just going to cook him down. And look, Shavkat Rakhmonov, without a doubt, is, in my opinion, the next best guy at welterweight. After seeing what Leon did, I have to say the champion is the rightful champion, the right best guy in the world. But Shavkat Rakhmonov is that monster waiting in the wings, and he's ready to go. I would love to see them two square off with each other. And, I'd love to see Colby and Wonderboy square off with each other.
Or even Bilal, maybe Colby and Bilal.
Yeah, well, Bilal's likely going to play, the long game. He's going to say, I'll just sit out and wait. And that's never a good idea, but things shake out in some people's favor sometimes. So I could see him doing that. And, Wonderboy and Covington, they're kind of closer in age, and that seems like it would be a fun fight for them to make. But, yeah, Shavkat Rakhmonov is as advertised, but he did not want to stand in there and trade with Wonderboy Thompson for too long. Wonderboy had his moments, but ultimately the night did belong to Shavkat. And I thought if Shavkat wasn't able to get the fight to the ground, it was going to be a long night for him. But, man, he's very good.
Yeah, and I want to chat Patty Ferguson and then obviously Josh Emmett's brutal KO.
Yeah.
Of Bryce Mitchell. But first, Chris, I want to get to the chat. Is there anybody in the chat, any questions or anything like that we could answer?
Yes, we have some chats. Jules was in here.
Hey, Jules, thanks. Yep.
She might be gone now, but
pop up the question on the screen if you have the ability.
Yeah. No questions,
so,
just comments on Colby, it looks like.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of comments on Colby. So thank you guys for joining the chat. We really appreciate you guys being in here. We went live for the fights as well. We're going to start doing a lot more of these live streams. So, yeah, anything you see there, Nick, that we should chat about?
No, let's get right into the fourth fight of the night.
Cool. Yeah. So Patty the Batty, Tony Ferguson. Patty obviously wanted to finish the legend. That would have been, a real feather in his cap. Tony Ferguson is as tough as nails. He's as tough as an old leather boot. He's not an easy guy to finish. Right. Patty looked a lot better than he's looked before. He physically looked good. He looked like he was in great shape. His body looked good. He showed some good wrestling, some good positional moments in the grappling exchanges on the feet as well as the ground. He obviously, his striking was pretty precise tonight. He landed some good strikes on Tony. I think overall, I'll give it maybe a B+ for Paddy Pimblett as far as performance goes. I think maybe this puts him right on the outside of the top 15, maybe 14, maybe 15. But I think he should fight for sure somebody in the top 10 to 15 next. He needs to have somebody with a number by their name in the cage with him next, so we can really see if Paddy Pimblett is as good as advertised.
Yeah, well, skill set wise, when you go in there against a guy like Tony Ferguson, who's 0-7 now in his last 7 goes, it doesn't really seem like that warrants a ranking. But the star power of Paddy the Batty is undeniable. He is a pay-per-view draw. He's somebody that they're putting on pay-per-views because he moves the needle. And there comes a time where you can't just be looming in the unranks, in the realm of the unranks, and you've got to start to test yourself. And when you're talking about anybody in the top 20 of a division in the UFC, anybody can beat anybody. And while I think he's got a very tough road ahead of him, let's see him test himself, maybe with one more unranked guy, or just jump right into like number 15, whoever that is at this current time. As long as they aren't already booked, somebody like that should give him the opportunity, because he's taking such a high profile spot on these pay-per-view cards. And I don't really see the UFC changing that. They're not going to put him on a free fight night that's if he's not the main event. And I don't think he's ready to start doing the 5-round fights yet, because that's sort of the indicator that they're ready to see you in a title fight.
Yeah.
And he's not
there yet.
But he's a needle mover. He's a great personality. People love to see him, and they will pay money to watch him fight. And that's why he's on the pay-per-view slot. But again, you can't have a pay-per-view slot that's like 2 fights away from title fights be a guy that is unranked fighting another guy that's unranked. So I can see them kind of slowly starting to creep him into the very bottom of the rankings. Let's see him go. Literally, let's watch him go 15, 14, 13, 12. Like, obviously, that's not what we're going to see have happen to Paddy the Baddy, but that's kind of the pace he needs to move at. And after being a pay-per-view guy for his last couple fights and being the guy that seems to be growing at a pretty fast rate, being one of the hottest prospects, especially as far as the general masses and the mass population are concerned, he's got to start to up his competition a little bit. Fun fact they put on the screen, actually, was that Paddy the Baddy has the second longest win streak in the lightweight division at 5, just behind Islam Makhachev,
No kidding.
12.
Wow, that's quite the jump there. I don't think Paddy will make it to 12 at 155 as far as undefeated streak goes. Talk about somebody who's got a streak going the other direction. El Kukui, Tony Ferguson, one of the all-time good guys at 155. Big fan of El Kukui. Seems like this might be it for Tony. I mean, that's what's that, 7 in a row now. He got, they took a guy who's a rising star and put him in there with him. He got his win. Has Tony served his purpose for the UFC? Is MMA done with Tony before Tony's done with MMA, or do you think he can stick around and keep going?
I mean, he looked all right. It didn't look like he was a world beater anymore. And
no,
to be completely honest, Dana's not in the business to getting people hurt. He's not in the business of, really growing new fighters over guys who did a lot of heavy lifting for him. He doesn't like to see older guys that have just seen their better days take beatings just for a paycheck. He literally does not like to see that stuff happen. He'd rather give you a job at the UFC than
to have that happen.
Paid fight. So my opinion, Tony Ferguson is a fighter. He will always be a fighter. And even if the sport of MMA in the UFC's promotion is done with him, I know Tony Ferguson will still compete. And that's why I kind of see him going in the bare knuckle direction. Either BKFC or Gamebred's going to try to sign him, and they'll get him in there with some meaningful people, because Tony Ferguson is still an undeniable star. David Goggins was in his corner tonight.
Yeah.
Like there's something to Tony Ferguson. There's some weight on his name still, even if he is on a 7-fight losing streak. And that's why I feel like we might see him move over to the bare knuckle world. He's clearly not afraid to bleed a little bit. And I think taking some grappling out of the equation, taking some, wrestling out of the equation, and just letting him go out there and strike with people would be entertaining. There's a market for it. Obviously, it's not as big as what he's been doing in the UFC, especially just a few years ago. But I don't want to see Tony leave combat sports completely. And I don't think, even if I did want to see that, Tony would do that.
Yeah, he's just tough as nails. He's going to leave. He's going to leave kicking and screaming.
Right.
And, just kind of recapping the final fight on the main card before we wrap, and that's Josh Emmett versus
ugly
Bryce Mitchell. Not much to talk about there. I mean, Bryce Mitchell is a great jiu-jitsu player. He's got a lot of heart, but the truth of the matter is his striking is not good enough when you talk about guys in the top 5, 6, 7 in the, 145 division. Right. And Josh Emmett, as Bryce said, admittedly himself, Josh is the hardest hitter at 145, and Josh certainly proved that tonight. Looked like, unfortunately, Bryce even had a seizure after that knockout. That was one of the more brutal ones I've seen in a while. And we were talking about how Josh, if you get in on him and you don't move your head, or you don't do something creative to get yourself in and create that body lock and get him to the ground, which is what I think Bryce wanted to do. Although Josh is a pretty good grappler in his own right. If you shoot in on him blind, or you walk in when you're a little bit too close and you don't have something for him, he's going to land one of those uppercuts. He's going to land one of those overhands. And that's exactly what happened. Josh packs a major punch. At 38 years old, the guy can still scrap. And I think he's looking squarely at a top 5 contender next.
Yeah. And Bryce Mitchell is right on the money. Unfortunately for him, it turns out Josh Emmett is actually probably the hardest one-punch power guys at featherweight. And before I get into everything that Josh Emmett did, looking really good in the short amount of time we got to see him, you got to talk about Bryce Mitchell. It's really hard to see somebody go down like that, have the bit of a seizure, not even be able to stand there to see his opposition get his hand raised because they got to get him to the hospital immediately. That's just brutal. But what I will say about the Camo Killer, which you've plagued his name to be, Bryce Mitchell has cracked into the top 10 of one of the most stacked divisions in the entire UFC. Featherweight is always stacked. It's always murderer's row all the way through. And he rightfully cracked into the top 10, had a beautiful undefeated record up until recently. And he did all of that with basically no striking.
Yeah.
His striking is so far below the highest level of guys, the people that share one ranking number different from him. They're
night and day.
Night and day. Ilya Taporia, people like that, Volkanovski, Yair Rodriguez, even a Brian Ortega.
Yeah.
These guys, their striking is so high level, and Bryce just doesn't have that. And so I don't want to kick the guy while he's down, but I want to shine up his grappling because he was so good on his grappling for so long, and he was able to beat tough opposition, high-level guys in the UFC, and earn himself a spot in the top 10 just off of his grappling, his wrestling, and his ability to take the fight where he needs to take it. Unfortunately, now people know that he's a little bit of a one-trick pony, and people like Josh Emmett have too much power, and they're too dangerous. And even though you see a big, bulky guy like that doesn't look like he'd be able to be that elusive or agile or dexterous when it comes to his striking, Josh Emmett is very fluid. He's very good at connecting his footwork, his motions, his agility, and putting it all together for some powerful strikes once he plants his feet and goes. That's why I really do think that Bryce Mitchell just totally was out of the realm. He had no business being in there on the feet with a guy like Josh Emmett, and that's why he was out there. His elbows were flared out. His hands weren't really by his face. His chin was exposed, and it just looked like it was not going to end well for him after about 30 to 45 seconds of them circling around the cage. He was getting way too close into range with Josh Emmett, and Josh Emmett was just sort of sitting there. And sometimes when you're watching a guy fight, or it's almost like hunting, like it's like, think of like a lion and then like a deer runs right in his face. He's like, is this too good to be true? Like, I'm going to see if he sits for a second. Like, I saw a couple of moments Josh Emmett was waiting, and he was like, wait a second. He's like way in my range. Like, I could just touch him right now. And then he did it a couple of more times, and he just didn't seem like he was prepared or had any knowledge that he was in such danger. Josh Emmett threw a crazy shot and just put him right to sleep. That's the type of level Josh Emmett's at. And unfortunately, Bryce Mitchell doesn't have it on the feet. He does have it on the ground.
Yeah, he certainly does. And I think for Bryce at this juncture of his career, he's got to leave Arkansas if he wants to have some real chance of making his way up the ranks, because he's training with Rolly Delgado, who's a very good jiu-jitsu player.
Right.
And that's largely why you said he worked his way up the ranks. Bryce has got great jiu-jitsu. He's got great submissions, but his striking is not on the level of that of a top 10 fighter.
Right.
And his striking is not going to be on the level of that of a top 10 fighter if he doesn't get out of Arkansas. I know he wants to stay where he's from. I know his ranch and his family and his like livestock and things like that means so much to him. And I respect him for that. But if he wants to compete at the highest level, he's 29 years old now. If he wants to give the next 5 years a good, honest to God try and see how far he can make it, he's going to have to do that outside of Arkansas, in my personal opinion.
I agree. Come to Houston, Texas, Main Street. We got some of the best striking in the world here. You can be in the room with world champion boxers, MMA fighters. Everybody likes it. Muay Thai. There's all sorts of great things for him. I'd love to see him in there. I'd love to share a mat with him and just get to learn some stuff from him too. We had a couple of people in the chat. Wish we could have gotten Chimaev versus Edwards instead of this. I agree.
That would have been fun. Yeah,
and Chimaev is the only big threat for Edwards, and only if he has a minimum of cardio.
Yeah.
So Chimaev looks like his 170 days are back behind him temporarily, at least until he finishes his business at 185. But I think Shavkat Rakhmonov and Chimaev are still the two guys that could really shake things up at 170. As Chimaev is so tenacious. He's so gangster, and he comes forward nonstop. And I think at 185, he's going to have a little bit more trouble doing that than he would have had at 170. He's strong for 170. He's powerful. He's explosive. And the weight cut was hard for him, but it still looked like he had energy at 170. Look, the guy fights in a style that's so dangerous and intense and explosive that he's going to gas out regardless of how big the weight cut is or how minor the weight cut is. He's a big guy. He goes hard, and he doesn't stop until he gets to finish. If that doesn't happen, he usually slows down a little bit by the second and third round. But I really do think that the size difference of 185 is going to be a little bit more of a challenge for him to deal with. And that's why I'd like to see Chimaev actually come back down to 170, because if they put him in there with Leon Edwards, I think it'd be a very interesting fight. While it'd be very competitive, it'd be hard for me not to put my money towards Chimaev.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chimaev he's so big now. He's not going to be making 170 anytime soon. So I think we really do have to kind of consider Shavkat as the guy. And, again, I think that fight is 50-50 at best. I mean, Shavkat Rakhmonov is an incredible fighter. Don't take anything away from him. But Leon Edwards showed tonight there's levels to this game. His striking is the best that there is at 170. And he showed, more importantly than that he has the extreme ability to defend a takedown. Now, I think Shavkat may have some more tricks up his sleeve than a 35-year-old Colby Covington does. But there again, Leon Edwards is getting better with every single performance. So it'll be interesting to see. But, tonight belonged to the champion Leon Edwards, and let's see what's next for him.
Yeah, and he's got to share a little bit of that love with Pantoja. There's two champs, and they
That's
both
right.
defended their belts. They look really good doing it, and I'd love to see both of them get active in the early part of next year. Probably won't happen until about April, May, or June, but hats off to Leon Edwards. He did what a lot of people thought he couldn't do, and, of course, Pantoja deserves all the respect in the world. And you got to throw a little bit of love Brandon Royval's way as well.
There you go. I think that's a perfect place to wrap. Guys, thanks so much for watching this live stream. Thank you for those who hung out with us for the fight little companion that we did. Yeah. And we hope to see you in the next video. If you haven't already, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and have yourself a wonderful evening.
Peace.